Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Manxiety Podcast.
We're your hosts, Ashad and Matt. Before we get started, if you're enjoying this show, please subscribe so you can get notified of new episodes.
If you want to share this with your friends, you can find us on all podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
This week, we'll be talking about questions. Matt's a big questioner. He questions things all the time. So we're going to be focusing on him a little bit. And trying to figure out how to ask tough questions. Because some of us that aren't questioners aren't so used to asking those questions. You know, for Matt, it's easy. He just goes around questioning everything in his life. For the rest of us, you know, there are some certainties in our life, so we don't have to question it so often. Am I right, Matt, or am I right?
I don't think that's how it works. So now I have a lot of questions about.
See, there he goes with the questions again, guys. I told you, this is just what questioners do. They enjoy this. They enjoy asking us questions. And if you're wondering why I'm saying questioner, Matt will explain that because he's better at it than I am. I'm a rebel, by the way. What's up, y'all?
I was about to say it's like we should probably explain what that is first. But there's this book called The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin, and she talks about ways in which people are like internally motivated to do tasks, and then externally motivated. So there's like a test you can take if you just Google Four Tendencies. We can post it in the description. But essentially, like, my thing is, like, I question. So, like, if I want to do something internally, I just go and do it. Like, if I can convince myself that I need to do something, I typically do it. But if somebody else tries to convince me I need to do something, I will not do it. And then a shot being a rebel tendency. Do you want to explain what that is?
I'm a rebel.
All right. So, anyways, rebels don't like being told. Rebels
we don't like being told what
to
to do. We like
they don't like telling themselves what to do, and they don't like others telling them what to do. So it's just kind of. And what's dumb is
we do what we want.
Rare. The rebel's the most rare. So now he's like, "Oh, I'm special."
I mean, I am, but that's beside the point. No, we do what we want. We don't like rules in most cases, especially if they don't make sense. We don't like. People telling us what to do without telling us, offering an explanation or like why we should do something. And in some cases, even if they do tell us why we should do something, we just don't like doing it. Yeah. But,
and the other two, just for reference, are upholders, which meet all expectations, internal and external, and then obligers, which meet external expectations but not internal. Obligers are the most common. They're the type of people that will say, in high school, I used to run track and I was super fit. Well, it's because there was a coach, there's a team, people made you show up. But if they had to say like, oh, I want to get in shape now and like I want to run a marathon now or something, they wouldn't do it because they would be like, well, nobody else is motivating them. So it's like if there's an external motivator, then they will do it because they like societal pressure type of stuff.
Yeah, I like that marathon example because I chose to run a marathon 5 weeks out of the marathon just randomly. One day I was like, I want to run a marathon, and I went and signed up and ran it. So I feel like that's a very rebel tendency, just like sort of doing what you want, right? Whereas I think if Matt ever wanted to do a marathon as a questioner, he would have to start asking, how long is it? Where is it going to be? Where am I going to run? What's the weather going to be like? Do I have to buy new shoes? Like all of these different questions before he made a decision to go run a marathon.
Yeah. And each of them kind of has their own anxiety that comes with it.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly what you just described about like I'm a very much a planner, right? I question every single opportunity and outcome, every single what if, and then I make my plan based on it.
He questions his questions, guys. It's questionception.
Questionception. That's good. But anyways, we can like deep dive that later because I think it's also pretty helpful, like just to have. You have to remember that like within all these books and like Myers-Briggs and different things like StrengthsFinder from Gallup, all these things, it's like they're frameworks to help you get more information. It doesn't necessarily define who you are. You can still change as a person. You're malleable, all that stuff.
Definitely.
But for today, we wanted to discuss asking tough questions, right? Because there's going to be a lot of tough questions you may have to ask moving forward with everything opening up due to COVID, right? You may have to ask your friends like, hey, were you vaccinated? Yes, no. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to kind of like maybe get what you want in a different way. So for instance, with that question, you could kind of be like, hey, my second shot was brutal, right? How was yours? So not like, hey, are you vaccinated, like attacking somebody, but like, hey, like, what was your experience with, you know, like the vaccine, or what was your experience with the second shot? Like, did you have the flu? And then people can kind of like branch off from there, right? But beyond COVID, there's a lot of tough questions that you're going to have to ask in life. A big one that I've never had to deal with is like, will you marry me? That could be a tough question. But also things like, you know, asking for promotions, asking for a raise, like all these types of different situations that you come into throughout life. And a lot of times it's rooted in the fact that we're afraid of the answer because we, with anxiety, tend to assume the worst.
And then sometimes we're not afraid of the answer as much as we're afraid of asking the question, right? Because I think that those can be two very different things. You know, you might be afraid, like Matt said, of getting a bad answer, but in some cases, you know the answer you're going to get. It's just asking the question is the hard part. And we can go through some examples of that a little bit later on. But Matt, what's since we have COVID going on, do you want to dive a little bit deeper into the tough questions that have to do with sort of COVID and, like you said, things opening up? Because it's not, I feel like it's not even just asking your friends, right? If you have a gathering now, because things are open, you know, whether they're vaccinated or not. But it's also, you know, if someone coughs, like I saw Matt over the weekend, and he coughed like twice when we were out at a restaurant. And I was, I mean, obviously I know he doesn't have COVID, but like if it was another friend that I hadn't seen and I didn't know that, it's like, how do you ask someone, hey, like, you're coughing, you know, do you have COVID? Is there something going on? Or, you know, how do you ask a restaurant, right? Like, what are your COVID policies, or whatever it is? Like, what precautions are you taking in a way so that it doesn't offend them, right? Obviously they're open, they're following some sort of guidelines, but I mean, maybe you want some more information, you want to feel more safe, so you want to learn the specifics of like what steps they've taken.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like Shab mentioned, I saw him this past weekend, and we went to it wasn't a brewery, it was like
Red Lion Tavern,
a bar or something.
It was a German beer garden.
Yeah, okay. And then, you know, we hung out with some friends and stuff, and at first you're kind of like, well, you're around strangers, but then you're like, okay, well, we're outdoors, everybody's wearing a mask outside, we're inside at a table, you take it off to eat type of thing, right? Like, I think more people are probably more aware of that than myself, because I haven't gone to a restaurant in a year. This is the first time I've been at like even like an outdoor seating place. I've picked up fast food and stuff, but
second time, right? I think you said you went a couple weeks ago to another outdoor restaurant.
Oh, right. Shit. Yeah, I did.
Now I'm out here keeping track of Matt's outdoor dining tendencies. What has my life come to?
You can count them on one hand. For the recent months. Anyways, yeah, so, you know, it's just one of those things where it can be tough to do, just like it'd be tough to like ask somebody like, hey, can you wear a mask? Especially before vaccines were kind of readily available. That was kind of a tough question you might have to have. And really, it's like, is it going to give you the peace of mind and benefit and help you? Like, if it's going to help you feel better, it's very tough to do, but sometimes you need to just kind of do it. So an example was like one of our friends in our group was saying that he's like, oh, I missed my COVID test. And I'm like, you missed your test? So I was like getting like red flags immediately. Right? I'm like, what the fuck? What do you mean you missed your test, right? And then I talked to him after, and I was like, oh, like, what happened? You missed your test? And he's like, oh, I'm traveling soon, and you have to get a negative test before you travel. Because like he's already been vaccinated, right? But he's like, you have to get a negative test to prove that you can get on the plane. And he's like, I just missed the appointment earlier. So I was like, oh, okay. But that first instinct in my head was like, holy shit, this is a problem, right? Like he missed the test because he's having symptoms or something, and he didn't tell us. But then when I got further information, right, because my brain ran wild immediately. And then I was like, all right, let me just go ask. So I asked, and then he's like, yeah, I just have to do it. Like, it's fine. I don't feel anything, but like, to travel, you have to get it. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was the case where, when you're traveling to certain countries, you have to have a negative test.
I think
presenting
any
it.
international travel, right now is requires a negative test.
Oh, okay. So see, I didn't even know, right? So like in my head, I could have very easily been like, oh my God, like maybe he has symptoms. Maybe he was hanging out with somebody that has symptoms. Maybe whatever. Wait, but I'm vaccinated, but is it good enough? All this stuff, right? Like that's what runs through your head in that split second. And then all it took was for me to just say, hey, for myself, I want to know what's going on here. So I just asked, right? And obviously it wasn't in like, I wasn't in like a very like an interrogative way or anything. I wasn't a dick about it. I just asked off to the side, and he told me, right? It was no big deal. So it was like, oh, okay, cool, right? Like, it's like the sooner you can get those questions asked, the less build-up anxiety you have because you have an answer. So for a lot of things, if you just have an answer and you know kind of what's going to happen, you're less worried about it, right? It's like some of the most anxiety you can have is like the doctor is like, hey, I'll call you in 3 days with your results. And you're like, well, just give me the results now. I'm like, I don't have them. I'll have them in 3 days. But those 3 days, it's like very, very anxiety inducing if it's like a big test or something, right? Like I did this where I did like an STD test, right? For like, all the common STDs plus like AIDS, HIV, everything, right? And I was like,
and the test was lit up, huh?
No, dude.
Full of positives.
Yeah, it was they're like, oh, you're just so positive. You're so happy all the time. I'm like, no, doc, that's not what I meant. But I was like, there's no way I have this stuff, right? I always use like, always have safe sex and all this stuff and like, trust my partners and shit. But it's like that little bit of fear that's like, fuck, what if something happened, right? And, in that situation, don't ever Google symptoms or anything because like your health anxiety will trigger. You're like, well, HIV can cause weight loss. I've lost a few pounds the last week. And like you start attributing it to that instead of saying that like you're just working out more or something or like eating less. So yeah, it's like if you need the answer and it's going to help you, try to take that step to do it. And then maybe just start with smaller questions first with your friend group, kind of practice on that. But know that for some questions, like what are your COVID policies or whatever, right? Like maybe a lot of people don't want to ask the question, kind of like in class where everybody says like, oh, thank you for asking the question because I'm sure other people had that same question, right? People are thinking it, they just don't want to be the person that says anything because now you're singled out as like the person who's like has the spotlight on them.
No, definitely. And I feel like questions like that, even though it might be tough for you to ask and it might be something that you feel anxious about, most cases, especially now that, COVID, everyone knows how serious COVID is and like restaurants have taken precautions and stuff. I think they already have answers prepared anyway. So it's like, just because it's a tough question for you doesn't necessarily mean it's a tough answer for them. It's most likely an answer that they have readily available that they can give you. And it's the same for most other cases, right? That has to do with COVID. If you ask a friend if they've been vaccinated in, a not so direct way, they obviously know if they've been vaccinated or not. So it's a very readily available answer that, you can get out of the way very quickly. And you don't have to get into specifics or whatever it is, right? People have their own reasons for why they did or didn't get vaccinated, and that's on them. As long as you're vaccinated, right, you're protected. So I feel like that's the important part. But again, a lot of these questions, the answers to them aren't necessarily difficult. It's just difficult for you to ask because it's such a sensitive topic. But yeah, I think that's that about COVID-related tough questions. The cough can obviously be hard. Anytime I hear anyone cough, it's just like the first thing I think is this guy has COVID, but chances are they don't. Like when Matt coughed, I was like, this guy has COVID, and I'm like, no, he doesn't. He's probably one of the safest people I know because he hasn't done anything for a year, versus other people that I know and hang out with who, go out weekly. So
I've just been just coughing alone, safe at home.
That's good.
Somebody asked me when I saw him, they're like, "Oh, you feel safe?" And I was like, yeah, bro, we're all vaccinated. Like, that was the point, right? We got to the finish line so I could like not have any worries about seeing you.
Well, he
Because
says
then,
that,
like,
but then he worries as soon as someone says they missed the test. You guys see what I mean?
well, that's
He's
different.
like, I got
because
no
somebody-
worries. He's all singing Hakuna
no,
Matata.
no.
He's singing
No,
Hakuna
no,
Matata
because-
over here.
No, we
And then-
discussed this. If somebody's showing up to a fucking party with people and they have COVID symptoms and they're not taking, like, they don't let everybody know, like, hey, I'm feeling sick or whatever, I'm not going to show up. Like, you're just a fucking asshole, and you should not fucking be friends with those people. Which, like, in that situation, that's why I was like, I don't think that's what he was doing.
Do you think
but,
I have friends that are assholes, Matt?
well, you're friends with me, and I can be an asshole.
That's
so,
true. You're the only one.
potentially.
I mean, I feel like if you trust the people and, you know that they're not going to show up at your house with COVID. Like, it's...
right, but
it's
then,
a
like,
matter
there were a
of,
lot
like,
of people, like, everybody's got a story, like, because we're hanging out with our friends, everybody's got a story of, like, someone's like, well, I caught COVID. It's like, how did you catch COVID? I'm like, well, I was hanging out with one of my friends who I trusted, but then he's like, oh, my girlfriend had, or his girlfriend had symptoms, and he didn't tell me, and then, like, he had to quarantine or something, right? And then, like, or somebody else caught it because a coworker didn't know they had it. So it's just one of those things where, like, even if you trust somebody, people make mistakes, right? So at this point, it's different now because people have been vaccinated now, but 8 months ago or something where like there were no vaccines, it's very different because you have to kind of like be like,
yeah,
do
definitely
I
different
really
times.
trust this person? And like, what if they have something and they don't know it? It's much different now, right? But
I think some of it comes back to the tendencies, right? Like, Matt feels more comfortable asking questions, whereas as a rebel, it's just like, I'm vaccinated, so I don't really give a shit. Like, even if you had COVID and you came over, I really wouldn't care. I'm hanging out outside. We're taking precautions. You're not, showing symptoms. So, I don't know. Different mentalities. But yeah, I think that's all we had about tough questions with COVID. Now, tough questions at the workplace, I think, are another big one. Workplace, and then, like Matt said, the relationship one. So which one do you want to tackle first, Matt?
we can do general relationship stuff. So one thing with questions that I really like is like on a lot of dating apps now, they will say things such as like, has kids, yes or no, right? Like drinks, yes or no, smokes weed, yes or no, like does drugs, yes or no, like wants kids, yes or no. Like I'm basically listed out all the shit on Hinge. So if anybody's ever used that app, like it gives you a pretty good breakdown of like what's available for people.
Sorry, all the ones on Grindr, you said?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
That
I was on Grindr, but it was just a bunch of dudes. So I was like, I can make friends, but I guess not a lot of women use the platform.
You're so dumb. No, that's pretty interesting, and I feel like that kind of sucks because, what if you hit it off with someone and they drink now, but you find that it's not something that you like them doing, and they stop drinking or they drink less, right? I feel like it sort of disqualifies people from
Right. I mean,
even
people
getting a
are-
chance.
People are fluid, right? People change throughout their lifetime.
No,
We
I'm
are
pretty solid.
I don't know about that, dude. You're looking a little. Never mind. But people can definitely change, right? And obviously, if we didn't think people could change, we wouldn't be having a podcast about changing your life for a better way, right? If you're anxious now, doesn't mean you have to be anxious forever. So it does disqualify people, like you said, but it's one of those things that, like, if you know what you're looking for, like if you know you never want to have kids, right? And you know that you don't want to date somebody with kids, a lot of people would be like, well, like, you're kind of a dick because, like, what if they're a really great person, you really click? But it's something if, like, it's something you're not willing to ever compromise on. I think it's better to just disqualify people early on so you can just focus on what is in line with your goals, and that way that you don't have to either make them compromise or make yourself compromise in the future, right? So
But, I mean,
obviously,
we
like,
just talked
drinking-
about being fluid, though, and like how everyone is fluid. Like, just because you disagree with something right this moment doesn't mean that's always going to be true. You may
Sure,
not
you
want
can change
kids
in the future.
Yeah, you may not want kids right now, but you get with the right person and you decide, hey, I actually do want kids. Like, it's a very
Sure,
change-
you can change.
Yeah.
But if you know you don't want kids right now and like you don't want to date somebody that has kids, there's no reason to say, oh, I might change my mind. It's like, right now I don't want this thing. Let me pursue this. If 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I have a different mindset. You change your filter settings, right? It's like if you're looking for a job in a certain industry, you target that industry for the most part, right? You can say like, oh, let me start over here and then work my way to this industry, but
see, job, you can't compare jobs to relationships. It's like a job is temporary. You're not permanently going to be there for the rest of your life, whereas a relationship is.
You could be in a job for the rest of your life.
You could
there are
be,
people that
right.
work for 40 years, right? It's very rare now.
Yeah,
but it's the same thing with like
is much more permanent. So it's like you can't just
Not
say.
really.
I mean,
marriage is pretty permanent, but like relationships are very fluid too, right? Because people change, they adapt, but it's like if you're going to ask those tough questions to get an answer early on, it's better to know day 1 versus knowing day 600 or something, right? And I guess like a better example to illustrate this is like I had a friend who was dating somebody for like 5 years and he always wanted to have kids, right? And she was like, eventually they talked about it and they were like going to get married, whatever. And she's like, I never want to have kids, but they had never brought it up in their 5-year relationship. So at that point, he's like, but I thought we were working towards having a family. We talked about getting a house together, all this stuff. And she's like, no, I never want to have kids. Now, of course, they were kind of young. She could change her mind, right? That's like not a reason to just be like, fuck you forever. But in that moment, he's like, this is something I will not compromise on. I want to have a family one day. And if you're dead set on not doing it, we're going to have issues, right? And he's like, instead of having issues in another 5 years, I'd rather just get it sorted now. Because at that point, he's like, well, fuck, I wasted 5 years of my life because I thought you wanted kids.
Yeah.
And they never brought it up because it's like, it is a weird thing to bring up, right? Like if you want to talk about kids or if they already have kids or if you want to talk about what your financial goals are, these types of situations where it's like when you're alone and single, you're like, well, dude, I can do whatever I want, right? But then when you're dating somebody or you are married to them, it's a much bigger conversation, right? You have to have like stuff in line. Otherwise, you're going to have fights down the road.
No, definitely. That's true. But I don't know. This is why I'm glad I'm married and I can't date anymore because dating in today's climate would not be fun. I mean, I guess it makes sense for you, right? You're a questioner. You get all your questions answered from the forefront, so it works out. It's funny that we're going back to these tendencies, but it is pretty interesting to see how the two different entities look at it, because like you would ask all those questions and you're getting the answers up front. So.
Right, but I will say like a questioner doesn't necessarily mean that you question things. In the context of the book, a questioner is specifically that you meet internal expectations and not external expectations because you don't trust people to make decisions for you. Like you can be a person who's skeptical and curious and asks a lot of questions and not be a questioner tendency.
Right. But
anybody can have that range. So it doesn't necessarily mean like for people listening that like if you question a lot of things that you fall into something.
Right.
Because it's about like the expectations. Like it's basically like how you handle tasks.
The three questioners I know in my life all ask a lot of questions. So according to my personal experience with questioners, you guys question everything. So
well, we question external motivators. So I don't question myself because I know what I want. But if you tell me to do something, I will be like, why do you want me to do this? So like in work, it happens a bunch where somebody will say, make this change. And I go, why? And if they just say, make the change, and like that's their end all answer, I won't do it.
Then you'll get
because
fired.
I'm like, well, because then I argue that their change is bad because they can't say what the change is. Like if they don't keep a change log of software changes, and then typically people will back me in that situation because they're like, well, what are the changes? Why are you doing this? Because other people need to know for a business purpose, but for me, I need to know because it's an expectational purpose.
Note to self, don't hire any questioners because as a rebel, I will fire them.
Yeah, but as a rebel, it's hard for you because you don't meet internal or external expectations. So you will still question if somebody tells you to do something, right? So you're still a questioner in that sense, just you don't have your internal locus of control. You also question yourself because you'll be like, do I want to go to the gym tomorrow at 7 p.m.? And you're like, maybe I don't want to go to the gym, so I'm not going to put it on my calendar. But if I show up tomorrow at 7 p.m. and I'm free and I want to go to the gym, I'm going to go. Right? So, like, you
Pretty
still
much.
question things. We're just, like, more vocal, I think, about questioning who we see as like outsiders, right? In the sense of like somebody just shows up and they're like a genie and they're like, you must do this thing to save the universe. I'm like, nah, I ain't doing shit. Whereas you might be like, that sounds like a fun adventure. Let me save the universe.
Pretty much. That sounds about right. Anyway, what was I trying to talk about?
Work questions.
No, I know.
Or
I feel
actually,
I
I'm
was
sorry,
talking about
relationship
something
questions.
specifically.
Marriage.
I can't date because of all the questions. Oh yeah, it makes sense for you because you get the questions up front. But like for someone like me, like I'd rather, it's like the spontaneous aspect of it. You like someone, you don't have to know everything about them. You learn that stuff, and then I feel like if you like someone enough or love someone enough, you guys will make it work, whatever that is. But other than in the olden days, the tough question in the beginning was, will you go out with me? I feel like Matt doesn't have that problem anymore in today's day and age because he just swipes left or right or whichever direction it is, and it just works out. You don't even have to ask, will you go out with me? It's all about the swipes.
Well, if they've already swiped on you, then they're willing to go out with you because they've made that first move in a sense, right? Like obviously, like if like you're not gonna swipe on somebody you're not interested in at least a little bit. Why wouldn't you? I mean, some people will do the approach of just like swipe on everything and then filter out, but then that causes its own issues because then you're just like, well, cool. Like now you have to just someone's like, oh my god, I can't believe you swiped on me. Like you're super attractive or something, and then you're just like, oh, you look at their profile and you're like, you have like 3 kids or something, like that disqualifies you or whatever, right?
That's pretty funny.
In a sense. So like I did it like the first time I was using dating apps because like that's what people tell you, just like, oh, just swipe left and filter or swipe right or whatever it is and like filter it afterwards. But like it creates situations that like you don't want to be a part of because it's like you're just doing it to see what sticks as opposed to like more of a targeted approach, right? But a lot of it is because you don't know what you want and you don't know what questions you would even ask, because a lot of people don't think about those questions right before they date. They just do what you did, right? It's like just it's fun, it's love, let's have a good time, which is great, right? If that's what you want to do, that's perfect. But it's just like if you have something that's like a really tough question that you're gonna have to ask one day and it's like 100% no from you, right? Then I don't know, I just see it as like I don't mind spending time with people and getting to know them and like dating and whatever, because that's always fun for me and like building relationships is great. But it's also like if I'm not in line with where they want to be, I don't want them to waste their time.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Anyway, going back to the tough question, used to be, will you go out with me? I guess that doesn't really exist anymore. But I think the next and like when that happened, right? I feel like for a lot of guys, especially ones that are more maybe introverted, more shy, cause a lot of anxiety because you don't know what they're gonna say. Now, when I was younger, in like high school, I had anxiety about that question too, right? I think the biggest one was asking someone to dance, right? Like when you go to a club or something. It's like, oh, what if they say no? What if this and that? You just don't know. It's a tough question to ask. But what you quickly realize going to a club is that you got to use the shotgun approach, and you have to just go up and ask, and you're probably gonna get denied 10 times, but then the 11th time someone will be willing to dance with you. Going out can kind of be like that too. Like just because someone doesn't want to go out with you doesn't mean that you should stop trying. It just means that maybe they're not the right person, right? Because going out, building a relationship has to work both ways. You have to like them, they have to like you, whatever that means. So, just because you get denied once doesn't mean you should stop. You have to put yourself out there in order to know whether, to find out what's out there and find the right one for you. Similarly, I feel like once relationships get a little bit further along, those questions do come up about kids. Obviously now it's sort of upfront, but those questions do come up and they can be very tough to ask in person. So it's nice that the app sort of allows you to put that in there. And I guess, like you said, for some people, that are looking for something specific, they can. But even those questions, I feel like, asking it can be tough, but if you're in the right relationship, if it's going the right way, maybe you can find out why or why not certain people have certain want things a certain way, right? And you can work through that, and maybe that changes. Maybe they say, I don't want kids because I want to advance my career or whatever it is, right? And I don't want to be, held back by my kids. So you talk through it and you figure out, hey, all right, how far in advance do you want your career to go, right? Maybe when you get there, will you reconsider, all these different discussions you can have to, if you guys want different things, to come to a compromise and find a solution that works for both of you and for your relationship.
Yeah, a lot of times, if you don't ask those tough questions, and that's why I'd rather do it sooner than later, right? Because it builds anxiety, and then also you may find out that somebody's in the situation I said earlier with my friends, you're just incongruent in that way, right? And you find out kind of maybe not too late in the game, because obviously you enjoyed their presence for a long time type of thing, but then you're just well, shit, you're going to feel like you lost time or you lost your youth or opportunity, whatever, right? It's one of the fallacies that we can fall into. But it's very similar with kind of transitioning into work-related questions as well, right? Because think about it, even when you're interviewing for a job, one of the things that they'll ask you early on is usually well, what do you want for a salary? And a lot of articles and books will recommend you don't give an exact range, because if your exact number, let's say you're I'll accept $10,000, right, for this position. That's what I expect to get paid. But they're paying $50,000, they're going to pay you 10, right? But with your career, getting into those types of things, they're also very important as well, right? Asking those questions. And it may be you have to ask the tough questions to yourself first before you're ready to ask them to other people, right? Why do I want this for my career? Why do I not want kids? Why do I want kids? Why won't I date somebody with kids? Or why will I only date somebody who already has a family, right? Because in that situation, you could be infertile and you're well, I only want to date somebody that already has kids, because then I can never have kids of my own, but I can have a family.
Or maybe you just don't want to raise the kids, whatever it is.
Right. It's all individual to the person, right? But with your career, when you asking questions will you promote me?
Before we get to the career, though, I feel like there was still some relationship stuff to talk about.
Oh, what else?
Asking for a girl's hand in marriage, right? Asking her parents. Definitely a very tough question. The example you gave in the beginning, popping the question to, marry someone. Oh, girls, guys, whatever it is. Your significant other's parents, or asking them to, to marry you. Both of those are very, very tough questions as well. Even though, Matt, you don't have any experience with it yet, I'm sure one day you will. It'll be a very tough question.
That you know of. I could have been told no, and I just moved on.
I would have known.
Oh, for sure, because nobody would ever tell me no. Come on, I'm a total catch.
I hope they wouldn't. You are a good catch, though. But yeah, so the first one, right? I still remember when I asked my my wife's parents for her hand in marriage, and just reaching out, and I couldn't sleep the night before, and I had rehearsed what I was gonna say. And I got there and I was feeling very, very anxious, just sitting there. And again, there was no reason to think that they were going to say no. We'd been dating for years at this point. We got along well. There was, I knew the answer was going to be yes. But there was still that anxiety with it, because it's a very big step, right? Regardless of whether they say yes or no, just asking for their hand in marriage sort of makes things more real. And I think that's part of the reason that you get anxiety, is because, shit just got real. What was once a concept in your mind, even if you bought a ring, whatever it was, what was once something that you were just planning, well, now it's something, it's happening, it's becoming a reality. And it can cause a lot of change, right? Obviously it's a very big life-changing event. And, now they're going to see you differently, right? your SO's parents. You're going to see them differently. You know, you might be anxious because now someone knows that you're planning on doing this, and they might slip up and tell, you know, your significant other accidentally. And then it ruins, like, if you're trying to surprise them, ruins the surprise, whatever it is. So in those cases, I mean, again, like back then, I wrote sort of a speech of what I was going to say. I practiced it to memory. I showed up early to wherever I was going. You know, I got a good seat there to make sure that I can see when they're approaching. It's like taking all these steps. A lot of the things that we've talked about, like preparation, can be very important. And then once you're prepped, right, asking the question itself isn't that big a deal. It's like they showed up, you know, I was anxious until they showed up. As soon as they did, it was fine. I asked the question. You know, they obviously said yes, since I'm married now. And, you know, and that was that. So a lot of it goes back to what we've been talking about throughout this whole podcast is, you know, being prepared, rehearsing, right? Like knowing what to expect. Maybe playing those things in your mind. You know, what if they do say no? You know, what do you do so you're not caught by surprise and feel negatively because of it? And then sort of along those same lines, you know, once it comes time to propose, you know, that can obviously be a very, very big question, because even though asking the parents is like semi-permanent, like proposing is something a little bit more permanent, right? Now you're actively taking the step, you're telling the other person. And interestingly enough, I had zero anxiety when I, you know, popped the question. And I think it all goes back to, one, our relationship was obviously going well. She had an inkling that was going to happen. We had talked about marriage. We had talked about building a life together. So it wasn't like she was going to say no. There was a chance, right? There always is, but chances are she was going to say yes. Again, preparation. I had prepped. I had hired a photographer. I'd visited where I was going to do it. I had, you know, planned a whole bunch of stuff out. I had people there with me, you know, sort of on the way there and while we were there, as like moral support, just like to be, you know, someone that's close to you, to be there with you. I had all of our friends there to support. So, you know, doing all that, again, when it came down to it, the question itself wasn't hard. It was everything leading up to it. And as long as you've prepared enough, as long as you have rehearsed and done everything you need to, you know, it'll usually work out okay. You'll feel less anxious about it. And I had practiced, you know, getting on one knee, dressed in what I was going to dress that day, you know, made sure that whatever pocket that I had the ring in was going to be easily accessible when I got down, you know, making sure I didn't rip my pants as I was doing it. So these are all things that you don't really think about, but if you prepare for it, right, then you don't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah, you didn't do leg day right before, so you couldn't get down on one knee. You didn't groan, you know, just
Exactly.
super smooth. You were good to go. Yeah, and like you said, in the relationship, you'd already talked somewhat about marriage. You've talked about building a life together. You talked about plans. So you already did a lot of the tough questions, right? They maybe came up more organically. Because obviously when we're talking about asking these tough questions, we don't mean like walk up to somebody and be like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And if you don't see your life plan going and living in this city with 3 kids and a picket fence, and like, I can't talk to you, right? It's more of just like having a better inkling of understanding what those answers may be when those tough questions come up.
Right.
Right. Because if, I know this happens a lot too, where people are like, oh, like, I always thought I'd move back to like the state where I grew up. And you're like, well, this is the first time I'm hearing of it. But it's like you hear about it like after you're already married, and then causes issues, right? So like the sooner the better. And the way I kind of think of it is, because this happened to me, I went to an amusement park and had a front of the line pass. So I went to the amusement park where we're going on this big scary roller coaster. I'm not a big roller coaster person. And the first time I was going to go on it, I panicked But it's because in the line, you had to wait like 30 minutes to an hour to actually get on the ride.
Yep.
It's like, fuck. Like, oh my God, I'm not going to like it. It's going to be too fast. It's going to go upside down. I'm gonna puke because like I get motion sickness sometimes. So I'm just in my head, right? Fuck. But I went one time and I had a front of the line pass. So because I had a front of the line pass, you walk up the back or like the exit gate. You walk up to it, you flash your pass, they put you on the ride. So in this particular example, I was sitting in the ride ready to go within like 2 minutes of saying like, hey, let's go on this ride.
Right.
Now, the ride started and I had anxiety immediately because it was one of those things where like you have to like climb up. It was like a Supreme Scream type thing at like Knott's Berry Farm where like it's like the drop thing. So like, they slowly raise you and you can see the entire fucking city. I was like, I could see my goddamn home from here. Now they're going to drop me to the fucking floor at this like high speed. But in the relation back to the questions is like asking tough questions up front can kind of be like a front of the line pass to subverting some of that anxiety. Because you just get your answer, you're on the ride, and then whatever happens on the ride, you know that like you'll be okay after the ride.
Right.
So if you're like, hey, an example I used earlier was like, hey, like negative COVID test, what's going on? And they're like, oh, I just have to get it to fly. Okay, cool. Right. It's like, I'm already on the roller coaster. I'm good. I'm not waiting in line being like, oh my God, like what's going on in my own head? Like you almost like you don't give yourself the time to think, because the more that you think with anxiety, the more you might be paralyzed by the what ifs and the amount of choices you have to make. Right. So like in that situation where you already did all the prep work, you were good to go. You're like, the ring's going to be in this pocket. I'm going to get down on this knee. Because then you can get in your head like, should I get on my right knee or my left knee?
Yep.
And then you're like, well, what looks better for the photographer? Well, the photographer's going to be on the east side, so the sun's going to be over there. And then like, it's like just so many choices you have to make, right? And that's why as humans, we like to have routines, right? Whatever routine you build is what you're going to consistently do, because our brains love shortcuts. We do not like having to make 10 million choices a day, because it's very easy to overload us.
Yeah, and a way to help battle some of that is to be more mindful, guys. When Matt was over, we went out to walk my dog, and him and my Andrea were just talking, and just talking the whole time, and I was just like slowly walking a little bit in front of them with the dog, and Matt's like, when you're so quiet, what do you think about? Are you thinking? I'm like, sometimes, and sometimes I'm just walking the dog. He's like, yeah, I have like 20 million questions, whatever number it was, going on in my head. I'm like, well, you're not being mindful. Like the whole thing we preach, right, is being mindful, being present in the moment of what you're doing. As long as you can like practice that and be more mindful, you won't have all those questions. So other than preparation, I guess being mindful is something you have to prepare for too, and you have to meditate and, learn. But it is a very important part of being able to ask these tough questions as well, or going on a roller coaster. You're right. If you're standing in line the whole time on a roller coaster and you're just like looking up and you're like, oh shit, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh no, I heard some rattling. What if a screw's loose? What if, like, you just build up your anxiety even more. But if you're present in your moment, you're talking to your friend about something, you're involved in that conversation that's happening, or you're just, maybe you're meditating, you're focusing on your breathing, you're not really thinking about all that other stuff, there's a lot less anxiety. Like going back to the example of the friend at the party who had missed the test, if you start getting in your head and asking all these, like, letting your anxiety build up about it, right? Like, what if he had COVID? Why did he miss his test? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? How long has he had COVID? Am I exposed? Am I this? Am I that? Like, you're just continually building more and more anxiety. Whereas if you're a little bit more mindful and you hear that and you just go straight up and you're like, hey, like, heard you have a test or you missed your test, what's going on? Instead of letting that all get to you first, you've sort of cut off the anxiety before it can get away from you.
Yeah. And that's what I saw in that moment. It's like, I'm gonna take, I didn't have this analogy the other day, but it's right. Like, I'm gonna take that front of the line pass to get my result immediately and just ask, right? Yeah. So instead of me thinking about it and then asking somebody else, like, hey, what did he say about this? I was like, hey, like, you missed the test, what happened? He's like, oh, I have to, do it for travel. Perfect, right? I'm like, oh shit. So immediately my anxiety was over, because in that moment, it's also hard because like we're hanging out, we're having a good time. Like I trust everybody there, so like it's almost like I forget that COVID exists. I'm like, holy shit, I'm just seeing some of my best friends, some of my favorite people in the world. I'm getting to hang out with them. We're talking about our life updates and kids and friends and relationships and who's starting to golf now because that's a thing, and just having a great time. And then it kind of brought me crashing back down to like reality, where it's like, oh shit, there is things going on outside the world, right?
Right. Definitely.
But yeah, you get on top of it as soon as you can. And look, I mean, it can be tough to ask tough questions, right? They're called tough for a reason. So if for whatever reason you're really not comfortable asking, maybe you can ask a friend who was a part of that conversation, or ask like a friend who you know is more direct with people, and they will ask for you.
Or ask a different way,
Right.
like Matt brought up in the beginning, right? Instead of being so direct, maybe you ask it in an indirect way. I think that's enough about relationships. I know you want to talk a little bit about work questions, and the one that you were specifically asking about was promotions, right? Earlier, when I said let's continue on relationships, or
Yeah, it's a lot
salary,
of-
maybe.
Yeah, promotion, salary, right? Like those are also kind of tough questions that you're gonna one day ask your boss.
Right.
And you will hear a lot. If you don't ask, it'll never happen, which is so true, right? Like if you never like, real quick for relationships, if you never say like, "Will you go on a date with me?" It'll never happen, right? If you never say, I mean, maybe you will like get promoted. Like some companies have like pretty good like review cycles, and they see top performers and they will promote you. But a lot of times you're gonna have to ask like, "Hey, I'm thinking about becoming a manager. I'm thinking about becoming this, or like I want to be a team lead. What do you think? How can we get there together? What should I start doing? What skills do I need to learn? What gaps I need to fill? That type of stuff."
Oh, definitely. I mean, not the last one, but like 2 promotions ago, like the way that it was brought up is I got my performance review, right? And I had exceeds expectations on everything. And the year before I had the same thing, exceeds expectations on everything. So this time when I got it, I was like, all right, so that's 2 years in a row I've exceeded expectations. Like, is there something more for me? So I went and talked to my boss and I was like, hey, like what's the plan for my position, right? Like where do I go from here? Because if I'm just exceeding expectations every year, I'm not learning anything new, I'm not growing, like there's no reason for me to be in this role or in this company if if you guys don't have a plan for me to continue moving up. Because you do want to, I'm not saying you want to like have whatever doesn't meet expectations or whatever, or like get put into a role where like you're gonna fail, but you definitely want to be in a role where you're gonna learn something new, where you're going to be challenged a little bit so that you can get better and continue growing, whether it's personal growth or whether it's within the company or whatever it is. So if I hadn't asked that question, if I hadn't gone like, hey, what's the plan for my position? Where do you guys see my position, down the line? That topic would have never been brought up, and I would have never had the opportunity to get promoted. So it's very important in a lot of cases to bring it up. If you're doing well, if other people see you doing well and you're not moving in any real direction, maybe it's time you bring it up and you see what happens. And if the company isn't willing to promote you or to give you higher pay or whatever it is when you're doing all this, maybe it's time you start looking elsewhere. And you start asking yourself the question of, why am I really here? That's a tough question to ask too. Why do I continue to stay at this job that doesn't appreciate me? I give it my all and I don't get anything in return. Why am I here? And in that case, maybe after you ask that tough question, your answer is because it's comfortable. And then you have to ask yourself, do I want to be comfortable or do I want to continue growing? Because in some cases, being comfortable might be what you want to be. Maybe you just had some kids. Maybe you just moved. Maybe you have other things going on in your life and you don't want to worry about, a new job, learning, growing, whatever it is. Maybe you just want to maintain where you're at. And that's completely fine too. But again, these are all tough questions, not only for you to ask others, but for you to ask yourself as well.
Certainly. And one thing that we've mentioned a bunch before is kind of being on more of a stoic mindset where you control the things that you have control over and then you don't worry about the things that you can't control. So in this situation of tough questions, you can control you asking the question. You can control you bringing up a topic. You can control taking that initiative. You cannot directly control the responses. You can indirectly control it in the sense of a promotion. You can do a really good job. You can make sure that your boss knows it. You can make sure that you've told your boss before, hey, I'm thinking about applying for this new position, or I want to be a team lead or something, right? You can control some of it. But at the end of the day, if you go to your boss, you've done everything right, and you just say, hey, boss, I really want this position, and they just go, absolutely not. Fuck off. You're dumb. I hate you. Right? I hope that never happens. That's a very exaggerated response. I don't think that's common at all. Then you can control how you react to that new stimulus that's been put in front of you, and then have another set of can I control this or not type of quick questioning with yourself. But at the end of the day, it is something where like you do have control over it. You just have to take that step forward, right? Understand what you want, understand what they want. And that's why it's tough, not to belabor the tough point, because especially in relationships, right? Everything's a relationship, right? You and your boss, that's a relationship. You and your significant other, another relationship. You and your friends, same thing, right? You're building all these relationships. And it can be very tough because you don't want to be the bad guy, right? You don't want to say, hey, were you vaccinated? Yes, no. Do you want kids? Yes, no. Are you going to promote me? Yes, no. But if you never take that step forward in the direction of getting what you truly want, once you know what you truly want, you really won't get it.
I mean, I don't think
Right.
that necessarily makes you a bad guy, though. Like, I feel like asking those questions doesn't make you a bad person. It's just...
Unfortunately, the notion with some of that stuff is that the more sure of what you want, some people in society will tell you you're being a dick because they're like, oh, I asked for a promotion. And your boss might be like, well, why do you deserve a promotion? And then you're like, well, because of this, right? But a lot of times people are like, oh, you're greedy. Like, why aren't you happy where you're at? Whatever. But it's like, there's no reason why you can't want to grow and achieve more, right? It's just that, like, on a societal level, people will be like, or even for instance, let's say, going back to earlier where I said maybe you're like dead set on not dating somebody who already has kids, right? People will say, oh, you're a bad person. Like, what if she was in a bad situation in this example where it's like a guy girl, like if they're asking me, like, well, what if she was in a bad situation, had a bad relationship, had a few kids, and it's like, okay, but like if that's something I will not compromise on, that's my boundary, right? Yeah. Everybody has their own boundaries, and those tough questions help make sure that you're acting in accordance to those boundaries, right? So like if you're at a position and you say, if I don't get a promotion within the next 2 years, I'm going to leave. And then 2 years rolls around, you don't get promoted, and then you stay there for another 3 or 4 years. It's kind of like you're not living in accordance to your truth. And then you start to just think like, well, I guess I just don't deserve it. I guess I didn't try hard enough. I guess I didn't do this. Because it's hard to see those alternative paths.
Or
and
maybe,
sometimes those alternative paths... Yeah, go ahead.
No, continue. What about those alternatives?
I was going to say, sometimes those alternative paths unlock... Like, the key to those locks and some of those paths is just those tougher questions, right?
No, that's true. And I mean, in some cases, maybe your outlook changes, right? Maybe staying at a company for 2 years, not getting promoted, you've gotten promoted enough at this point where, maybe at this point it turns into, if I'm at a company for 5 years and I don't get promoted, then I have to leave, because I feel like anyone in any career is going to hit a point, right, where it's going to more or less taper off. Your growth potential, especially within a company, is going to taper off. But even within an industry, if you've hit the executive level, there's really nowhere else for you to go. Like, if you've hit that level, that's like you're at the top. Like, where else maybe you go to another company and maintain that same position, but you're not going to move up any higher. So that's the thing. Like, those things can change. And as you reach higher and higher management levels, that the span within those is going to fluctuate. It's going to get longer and longer. Because when you're just starting off, when you're, what do they call, like, the lowest level, like an associate or a assistant or whatever. When you're newly hired.
It depends on the position, yeah.
Whatever it is. When you're newly hired, right? Like, yeah, you should plan to work hard enough and get promoted every couple of years, right? Like, to continue moving up ahead. But then as you get into more management positions, more maybe VP positions, that changes. That span becomes a little bit longer because now you're at a level that maybe you can't get promoted unless someone else leaves, right? Or you can't get promoted unless you've had X number of years of experience, because that's what the industry is looking for. Like in my case, right? Like I know I want to be a CTO. I need like 15 years of experience to become a CTO. 10, 15, whatever it is. Like, the thing is, I'm not there yet. So there's, even if I wanted to, even if there was, I had all the qualifications, I had all the knowledge for it. In most cases, I don't have the experience to do that. So it won't happen. And similarly, like if you're within a company and you want a position like that, where it's a executive level position, there's only one executive level position, right? In a company, there's only one CEO, one CFO, one CTO, one CIO, one COO, one whatever C, X being whatever letter O. So, you either have to wait till they leave and hopefully have built your qualifications enough so that you get promoted to it, move to another company and apply for that position once you have all the experience you need. Or 3, you just have to stay in your position, right? Like, you have to stay where you're at until that time comes, or maybe you're comfortable where you're at and you just stay there forever, right? Or for as long as you see fit, for as long as you're comfortable, until something changes and you decide to do something else, right? Maybe you have kids, you're in a position, you're there until your kids leave your house and then they're gone. You're like, well, I have more time now. Maybe I want to take on more responsibilities and I want to, go to a different company, start a separate business, do something else on the side, move up in the company, whatever it is.
Yeah. One of the precursor questions you have to ask yourself, which is kind of a tough question, it's a 2-parter, is how do you define happiness? Because that's important for the next question. And the next question being, are you happy? Right? So if you're happy with what you're doing, in the role that you're in, at the level you're at your work, in the relationships that you have, all that stuff, if you're really happy, then keep doing what you're doing.
Yep.
Right? But if you want to make a change, and it's going to involve one of those tough questions, but you know that may get you happiness down the road, then you need to take those steps towards that, right? The same way that we talk a lot about, meds, right? Meditation, exercise, diet, sleep. Make sure you're doing those every day. Well, they're hard to do, right? We fall off constantly. The same way that, like, there's tough questions that I'm sure me and Ashot have in the back of our heads as well. It's saying, like, I really don't want to fucking ask that thing today, right? I'll wait. But there comes a time and place when you know that it's going to be a detriment to your mental health, to your anxiety, and that's where you want to step in and try to get ahead of it, right? So if you just think about those things, it can be tough. It can make you sad, right? If you're not in the best of situations at home. Obviously, we always wish you, health and happiness, but there are situations where maybe things aren't going great for you. And it's like, what do you have control over? What can you do now? And maybe sometimes you don't even know what questions you should be asking. You don't know that you should ask your boss, hey boss, can I be a team lead? Can you promote me? What's my career path look like? Not every company does that. So definitely just try to explore that, lean on your community, lean on your friends, your family, and ask them what they did, right? How they're managing things, so on and so forth, right? How they handled, so if I was going to go ask somebody to marry me, I'd be like, hey, Ashot, how did you handle it when you were talking to your parents? You said you were really anxious. I get anxious sometimes, right? How did you navigate that, right? Okay, you prepared, right? Because right now, a million things are running through my head too, going, oh shit, I never thought to wear the suit, or not the suit, because you didn't propose on a suit. Obviously, that'd be very obvious. You probably were going to wear whatever t-shirt and shorts.
I actually did propose in a suit.
You're wearing a suit at the beach?
Yep.
Oh, okay. And yeah, in that situation, I was like, wait a minute, am I misremembering?
No,
Yeah,
I
okay.
just planned it out well where, the
Right, you were
plan was to
coming from,
go
like, a
out to a
fancy dinner,
fancy
right?
dinner. Exactly.
Yeah,
So we
and
were
then
all
you
dressed
went on the
up.
beach, and then we were holding the sign, and yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
there you go.
Shot did it in the cutest fucking way possible. It was like right out of a movie where he's like, "Oh, look at the like binoculars on the pier," and the binoculars were set to like all of his friends holding up a sign saying, "Will you marry me?"
Thank
Yeah. So if you have any questions about that, by all means, reach out to this guy. This guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, people thought I was crazy when I first said I wanted to do it. They were like, how's that going to work? Well, I don't understand. I don't get what you mean by you're going to do this and that. But then once it was done, everyone was like, hey, great idea. Yeah, I totally thought that it was a great idea from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, shit. Some of those things can be tough questions to you, right? In the same regard of like getting asked a tough question, right? We're gonna talk about how to respond to tough questions.
Right. And we can
Mostly
talk
just
about
how to ask
that
'em.
next time. I think that's it for now. Sorry we talked your ears off. But thank you all for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Ask those tough questions. Start with yourself, and then maybe you start asking them to others around you whenever you need to. But until next time, take care.